All right, DD India's Shubhendu Ghosh is joining us live on the story, and I also have Ambassador Sanjay Bhattacharya, who is former Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs, joining us on the broadcast. Both of you gentlemen, a very warm welcome to the broadcast. First to you, Shubhendu, very quickly. You know, the red carpet welcome, the handshakes, it was certainly looking like Donald Trump has backtracked on his earlier statement. What are the points? Do we have any information on what exactly are the points discussed in the meeting? Because the Ukraine conflict was certainly not.
Well, Siddharth, but to be honest, the Ukraine conflict was at the heart of this discussion. What did not happen were certain expected outcomes vis-a-vis a possible ceasefire or some movement towards a peaceful resolution of the conflict. Either of the things haven't worked out. There is no deal, clearly, as President Donald Trump has said. So the ball really remains where it is. But optics are important. You mentioned red carpet. Whether it's red carpet, whether it's asking President Putin to join him in his car to the summit, also letting President Putin, Russian president, who's the visiting president, speak ahead of President Trump. Usually the tradition is that the host president speaks, addresses the media, and then the visiting president joins in. So there are a lot of interesting courtesies that have been extended to President Putin. And in the past few months of Donald Trump's second tenure, we haven't seen this kind of a welcome for any of his Western allies as such. So that really puts into a question as to what was going on here. This appears to be a great opportunity for thawing the relations between US and Russia. President Putin did mention that, referring to the previous administration, American administration, that Russia-US ties are at the rock bottom, but he referred to it. Then he sort of invoked how President Trump, if he was there earlier, this war wouldn't have happened. Interestingly, the location, Alaska, Anchorage, before the meeting, all the references were about how America uses this as an important military base to defend America against Russia and Russian threats and Cold War and all those references. But President Putin's references were very different. He gave references of America-Russia cooperation, the manner in which they fought common enemies during the Second World War. So what I'm trying to get at is that it didn't seem that President Putin was addressing a mediator of a Russia-Ukraine conflict. He was, in fact, directly addressing the American president. He appeared very consumed at really working on the direct relationship between Russia and the United States. And that could have implications going forward. Now that President Donald Trump has said that a three-way peace deal is the only way forward, three-way negotiation is the only way forward, with EU and Ukraine also participating fully, that really in many ways puts the ball where it was, because ahead of the meeting, EU has pressed for unconditional, immediate ceasefire for any kind of negotiations to begin. But that has not happened.
Definitely, it's not happening right now, and it's more of a meet regarding strengthening the ties between both the countries. I'll come back to you, Shubhendu, but we also have Ambassador Sanjay Bhattacharya with us. Sir, as all eyes were on this crucial summit, I also asked this to Shubhendu as well. It was very much expected that a solution would come out as far as Ukraine conflict is concerned. At least a ceasefire, but no result and no deal. Trump labeled the talks as productive, but it was more of a strengthening relations meet that took place. How do you analyze this entire situation?
Thank you. I think this was a very significant meeting, firstly, and I think it's an important initiative towards peace. And we should welcome it, as I believe the government already has. I think there are three things that stand out for me from this particular meeting. The first is that the presidents of the United States and Russia have actually met. I would presume that their agenda was much wider than Ukraine, and I think the possibilities of having a settlement on Ukraine was actually pretty low at this particular stage. I think Trump had said maybe about 25%. So I think that was not the central issue, although it was a very important issue. I would expect they would have discussed many issues of bilateral strategic interest for the two sides, Russia and the United States. And I think that would have been the key focus of a lot of the discussions. Of course, Ukraine was very big. And I think given the situation over there, it is catching the media spotlight very much. The second thing that I think is very important is the messaging that comes out from Putin very directly, and I think from Trump as well. In a subsequent interview to, I think, Fox News, he made that more explicit. And I think what he's saying is that while he can be a mediator, a go-between, call it what you will, but the deal will eventually have to be between Ukraine and Russia. And that, as you can understand, has its own complications because the Europeans are very much in the picture. And I think both the Americans and the Russians did not wish to have the Europeans over here at this point of time. So I think the emerging dynamics of how this pursuing peace initiative will follow, and that's how they described this particular meeting, will be very interesting because Zelensky is supposed to come into DC on Monday. We've already had the Trump presidency speaking to NATO leaders. So, Putin has also extended an invitation to Trump to visit Moscow for the next round of summit-level discussions. The third point, which I think is also important and perhaps also somewhat relevant from our perspective, is that one of the things that has come out of this particular meeting is that after the NATO summit, you did see that Trump had a slightly different posture towards Putin. He was somewhat aggressive as well on some of these occasions. And of course, the secondary tariff issue had come up. But after this meeting, we do see some softening on that. And we will have to see whether the secondary tariffs are actually rolled back. So that's something that also has relevance for us.
Okay, what would you attribute to for this soft behavior of Donald Trump?
Well, the issue is actually fairly complicated. You know, the issue of linking Russia into secondary tariffs. And I think it is unfair, to say the least. And if that were indeed the case, there should be secondary tariffs on EU partners, because EU, as you know, are the largest importers of Russian energy. So why not on them? So if you have a deal which is 15% on EU, why not have secondary tariffs on them as well? And I think that's not what the idea was. I think the idea was to have a certain understanding regarding the economic regime and a trade balance, which of course is has gone into another orbit. But we leave that aside. But I think the discussion with Putin would have convinced Trump, apart from everything else that he would have learned in the interim.
Definitely. Well, India has also welcomed the summit, the meeting, and India's stance has always been the same, that nothing can be achieved on the battlefield, and it's only dialogue and diplomacy through which any outcome could be possible. We were just talking about, sir, Zelensky's visit to Washington on Monday. Any positive outcome of this situation, would not have only benefit, and I'm talking about the meeting, in terms of stabilizing the situation, but the entire geopolitical scenario to an extent. Now, with Zelensky going to Oval Office on Monday for talks with President Trump, can we expect something positive from here? Although Trump has already said that there is no deal until there is a deal. Is he hinting at territorial concessions here? What would the deal be otherwise?
So I think on Zelensky's side, he wants two things. One is he wants certain kind of security guarantees he expects from the United States and Europe. And the second is he wants a deeper integration into Europe. Of course, there is something that no sovereign leader can give away, which is part of his territory. But at the end of the day, I think there are ground realities that he will have to deal with on that particular aspect. As far as security guarantees are concerned, I think he will get certain assurances which have been kind of on the table ever since the NATO summit 2 months ago. As regards the integration into Europe, I think that's something that will probably work out in Ukraine's favor at the end of the day if Ukraine were to join the EU in some format, but not join the NATO. Something that could be a via media that the Russians might be willing to consider. Let us not forget, the Russians actually have the trumps on this particular card.
Definitely. Trump also said that if meeting works out, one with Putin could come next. No one wants to see the White House fiasco, really.
I think that is unlikely to happen if somebody of the stature of Putin is there. The dynamics of a Putin presence in any meeting will be very different. That doesn't normally happen in diplomatic interactions.
We hope so, sir.
But I think the possibility of a three-way meeting would give certain assurances to the Ukrainians. I'm not quite sure as to how the Russians would feel about it. But this is something that is further down the road, because that meeting of the three leaders will happen only when all issues have been ironed out. There are, of course, the possibility that the officials and other negotiators and other interlocutors can come in and be helpful in that process. But that summit meeting of the three leaders, if it were to be, will be the last stage.
Okay. Okay, all right. We also have DD India correspondent Shubhendu Ghosh joining us, who's also closely tracking this story. Shubhendu, Zelensky going to Washington on Monday. Trump says if meeting works out, the one with Putin, could come next. What can we expect here? What is the future of this particular scenario, which is there in front of us right now? What is your assessment of this?
Right, Siddharth, as Ambassador Bhattacharya mentioned, that it is a positive step forward if all the parties to the conflict sit across the table and discuss what could be done. So far, for this summit, for instance, the concerns were that the parties to the conflict are not present, and therefore what kind of an end to the conflict could we be looking at? But yet, though those problems remain, fundamentally, each of the sides have put forth certain maximalist positions. This war, remember, is in its fourth year. If you look at the list of demands that Russia had to sort of put an end to the conflict, which about territorial sovereignty, which was unacceptable to Ukraine. Now, Ukraine's own ambitions of becoming part of the NATO, which Russia says was at the heart of the beginning of this conflict. So there would be a need for both sides to climb down from their long list of expectations, the outcome of the conflict. Each leader would, of course, want, after such a long, drawn-out battle, they get the best deal. But that negotiation has to happen really across the table when all the parties sit together. I think what is happening here, and I just want to point that out, is that there was a reference to the previous administration that President Putin did when he says that the relations between US and Russia had touched the rock bottom. Also the time when US wasn't acting as a mediator to this conflict. In fact, it was party in the sense like the rest of its transatlantic allies, the NATO allies. It was putting in all its resources to help Ukraine fight off Russia. But we've seen that shift happening with Donald Trump's administration, where he's time and again questioned US's investment, although those investments continue. There's also references to security guarantees which America would provide. But in terms of perception, the manner in which the new administration engages with President Putin, that is very different from the previous administration. And which side does United States, the Trump administration, swing in this negotiation between Russia and Ukraine? That side is going to will have a particular advantage. It's difficult to, I think, predict as of now the manner in which he sometimes is threatening President Putin. Sometimes he's threatening Zelensky in person, President Putin, over his messages. And another point that I just want to mention is that while there were these tariffs, secondary tariffs that were imposed on India, other countries for dealing with Russia, here we see President Putin also bringing with him a business delegation, referring to cooperation in digital technology, space, and Arctic region. So here we're talking about the possibility of boosting the ties, resetting the ties between Russia and US, and that has wide implications for its allies in NATO, in Europe, as well as Ukraine, as to what are the larger objectives of United States vis-a-vis Russia.
Definitely. We have to wait and see, certainly, that what's going to happen when Zelensky will meet President Trump at the Oval Office. But thank you so much as of now, Shubhendu Ghosh and Ambassador Sanjay Bhattacharya. Thank you so much for joining in on the broadcast. It was wonderful having conversation with you both. And thank you so much, Shubhendu, again, and Ambassador.